for most of us, I kind of alluded to this, smaller differences in culture, we have a tendency to underestimate the importance of them, and we almost sneer at them. So, for example, if you're from the rural area of a state in America, and you decide you're going to go to Peru to do mission work, when you get there, you're going to be all receptive. You're going to assume that you don't know anything. You want to learn everything, and you'll respect everything you see or hear. You know, anything where they're different, you'll notice that, and you'll try to respect that, and so on. But if you move from rural Pennsylvania into New York City, and you find people are laughing at the way in which you talk and the way in which you dress, and you're not cool, you're not hip, you're not sophisticated, or you'll just sneer at them. So the small difference, you'll just be angry at it. Instead of seeing that as another culture that you have to respect and learn from and listen to and engage with, you'll just laugh at it, or you'll be angry at it. And I think that, and you will almost deliberately say, I'm going to do things just the way it was done. So I've alluded to that. I actually think that's the reason why an American who goes to another country is more effective missionary than an American who moves from one part of the country to another part of the country, because they just don't think those differences are there, and yet people notice them, and they won't tell you about them because they are relatively small. In other words, you get up and you talk and you do things, and the people from the culture that you're trying to reach see those things that just don't, they're a little bit offensive or a little bit silly or they're a little bit kind of dumb or a little bit goofy. And they won't tell you because they're just trying to be polite, but they won't follow you, and they won't listen that much to you. And you won't be that effective, and it's because of a lack of contextualization, because it's the small differences that actually kill us, I think, almost more than the big ones. I think I know what you're saying. First of all, if you're really from the culture, which Raymond is, then in some ways, in some ways, Raymond doesn't have to make enormous adaptations. And yet, one of the things I realize when I talk about the A doctrine, B doctrine as a way of saying all persuasion happens like that, you take what the person already believes and you use it against them. It's sort of like judo. You're using their forward motion against them. For example, I'm sure Raymond has talked to tough guys and who are really in trouble, and they just won't admit it. And for him to say, look, you think you're strong, but let me tell you what real strength is. I may not have said this exactly, but are you strong enough to be weak? Are you strong enough to be vulnerable? Are you strong enough to admit your weakness? That's real strength. Now, what's he doing? That's an AB. You're taking something here's a tough guy. He wants to be strong. He says, let me just tell you what real strength is. You're not being strong. You're being a wimp because you're not admitting you need help. I mean, that's a typical move on anybody who's an addict. But what you're actually doing, especially for men, I mean, it doesn't work that well for women. Most women don't think, I want to be tough. But maybe some do. But the point is, you have to use their, the A-B thing is not, the way I was giving it to you is because I'm in Manhattan, I'm a professor type, and I was giving it to you at a kind of in a conceptual form. There's also intuitive forms, there's all sorts of other forms. Nevertheless, he doesn't have to do quite the same. His danger is going to be if he sticks at this long enough, and he finds that at a certain point, the younger guys that he's trying to reach, he can't reach anymore because they're different. See, one of the things, the Seventh-day Adventist Church that we first met in on 111 East 87th Street originally reached this neighborhood. The neighborhood was German working-class people. And but by the time we got there in 1989, it was in English, the German Americans were coming back in, and they weren't reaching their neighborhood because the neighborhood had become gentrified. It was basically multi-ethnic young professionals. So if they had seen the change, they would have had to do the adaptation. In that case, because they'd lived in New York so long, because the Seventh-day Adventist Church had been there forever, these people who were leading the church had been there forever, they didn't see the change that was happening. So that's what I meant by saying that the danger for those of us who are moving here is that we don't know the culture and we don't make the adaptation. The danger for people who are actually from the culture is initially they can actually do a lot. They're still doing the A-B persuasion, But eventually they have to watch out because you tend to live in your own people group. And as you get older, you actually stop realizing about the changes, and you can't reach your neighborhood anymore. Am I answering your question? I was very helped by the only other place I've been a lot doing ministry, a lot outside of America, is Britain. Now, it's not a huge step. I mean, they do speak a form of American over there, for example. Right, it's hard to understand them, but if you really work at it, you can. And yet, just for example, for me to get to know the cultures there, and there are very different cultures there, but none of them are American, really helped me. There is a statement, I haven't been able to track it down. It must be a line in a poem somewhere. It says, "What does he know of England who only England knows?" Which means you don't know your own country unless you get out. And you see other people, that things that you think are absolutely, you don't even realize it's a culture. By the way, you have heard me use this illustration, is everybody in this room, see, Phoebe, you and I have a problem in that we're white. And because white is the dominant culture, we don't have to learn how the other cultures work in order to get along in life, but they actually have to learn about us. Robert constantly makes jokes about the fact that right now we're on a kind of white approach to punctuality in a meeting like this, that in another kind of place they'd be much more relaxed about how long things take. Whereas what we will do is, in other words, Black and Hispanic people come into a thing like this and they adapt because they're kind of used to it. I remember, I don't know if Glenn, where are you, Glenn? Yeah, I don't think Glenn remembers this, but when I first started going to prayer meetings here back in the late 80s with a lot of African-American Hispanic brethren, he said, look, as a white person, you need to realize that your non-white brothers are always going to want to go on about a third longer than you think is appropriate. So if you think right after 20 minutes, we had 20 minutes of prayer, it's just about right, they're going to want to go 30 or 40, and they're just going to keep going, singing, praying, talking, everything. And you just got to say, there's no place in the Bible that says how long things have got to be. You got to adapt. But as a white person, I didn't get it. So in some ways, just coming to New York was a change for me. So how do you do this? If you're from New York, get out of New York. If you're from a particular racial group, make sure you get into other racial groups. But for white people, that's actually a bigger need than generally non-white people, because non-white people have to figure out how white people work. But white people don't have to figure out how they work. So we're more culturally naive. Actually, we all have the same problem. What happens is once your church, whether you're the dominant, Anglo-white church that realizes, boy, why are we all lily white in here? Why don't we reach out to others? Or whether you're an ethnic church in a multi-ethnic community and you say, we want to reach out. As soon as you start doing that, the people you're trying to reach out to say, I'll tell you why we don't like it in here, because I don't like the way you do this. And the things that are invisible to you, it's what I was saying to Phoebe, things that you don't think of as culture, you suddenly realize. Some of you know I've told this story because he's passed away now, but my first African-American Christian friend really was a friend of Kathy and mine named Elward Ellis, and I went to Gordon Conwell with him. And at one point, I remember Elward saying, he said, you know what the problem with you white people is? That's an interesting way to start a sentence. He says, you don't think you've got a culture. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you see, when you see me, expressing my emotions or doing this or that, you say, that's wonderful, that's the way black people do, but what you do is just the way things are done. It's not a white way, you just think that's the way things are. Now, so you don't even realize you got a culture. Now, I would say that because you are a racial minority in this country, your church is automatically more aware. You're less clueless about culture than, say, an all-white church would be. But on the other hand, Asian cultures are every bit as rooted in tradition as white people, and for different reasons. They can be very rooted and very moralistic. You have to use the gospel on your leaders to say, this is a Chinese way of doing things, but it's not necessarily a biblical way, and we have to stop thinking deep down that the Chinese way is really the right way. It's not necessarily the right way. the way we make decisions. By the way, here's a list. Can I give you a list of cultural differences? You might want to take it, well, you can get it off, whatever this is going to be put. It says, obviously your language, obviously when I reach white people, you better speak English, but of course that's an easy one. Number two, your illustrations when you're talking to people. What sports do you use, or do you use sports? As soon as you use an illustration, you're moving towards some people and away from other people. Your humor, your level of self-disclosure, how forthcoming you are about your feelings, the length of your attention span, how long do you go on when you're talking to people. Emotional expressiveness, by the way, some of you are going to laugh. In fact, you're all going to laugh. I remember 10 years ago, I talked to a Hispanic member of Redeemer who said that when he brought Hispanic friends to church to hear me preach, he had to start by telling them something. He says, now, when you get here, I want you to hear my pastor. I want you to know that in spite of what it looks like, he really believes what he's saying. Right? I mean, he really passionately, he says that is passion for him, you know. Okay. Now, on the one hand, I can't stop being what I am. On the other hand, if you want to reach, frankly, it's as simple as this. If you want to reach, you want to become a more multicultural church, first of all, recognize a lot of the things that you do as cultural instead of the right way of doing things. Work on your hearts with the gospel so you get out of that kind of, we all are somewhat culturally pharisaical. You know, deep down inside, we just feel like, you know, they're not punctual, these people. They're just not punctual, you know. But then thirdly, you actually have to diversify the people up front. In other words, when white people come in, they need to see both Chinese and white faces. Just like, in other words, if you see yourself up front, then you feel more welcome, and there's no other way to do it. If you wait until there's 20% white people in your church before you hire a white staff or something like that, it'll never happen. So it's a combination of things. But you have to, I went down that list, emotional expressiveness and all that, because you really have to go through a list like that to realize just how much you do is deeply cultural and not just Christian. So go through the list, think about it, talk about it, diversify your leadership, and then you'll diversify your congregation. Well, listen, that's why a lot of people are afraid of contextualization. That's why I try to say that there is a sin of under-contextualization. But obviously, over-contextualization means that you are afraid of talking about the offensive parts, that you give people the impression that you're really not what you do bait and switch to get them in the door. You appear to be something that they're really, once they get inside, they realize you're not. I think maybe I would almost have to sit down and look at a case-by-case basis. I'm not sure I can give you a hard, fast rule, but, well, I can take a case from you, but here's something I can tell you. The A-B doctrine thing, generally, you don't wait to get to the B doctrines like next year. Got it? The A-B doctrine is not strict temporal difference. It's a logical sequence. So, for example, I know a guy, and I have no problem with this, I know a guy who went to, he was a conservative Baptist who went to a liberal Episcopalian church and was asked to speak there. And he decided he was going to share the gospel with them. He thought there were a number of people who didn't understand it or know it. So he started by saying, I want you to know I believe that everybody who's not a Christian, a born-again Christian, is going to hell. I believe that every part of the Bible is inerrant. Okay, he started like that. Now you say, oh, he's breaking your rule. Not really, because that works, by the way, with an urbane, sophisticated audience. It's cheeky. It's shocking. It gets attention. And basically, the listeners are sitting there saying, this guy dug himself into an amazing hole. I can't wait to see how, and he's just saying, I can't wait to see if he can dig himself out. And of course, that's good communication. You're getting people really attentive. And then, but if you actually watch and hear how he builds the case, he always takes things they already think they believe and builds like that. So the point is, you can't, if you never get to the B doctrines, that week, that month, that, if you put it off, that's no good. I think you need to get to the B doctrines in the same talk. You know, the A doctrines are the first point of the sermon, and the B doctrines are the second and third point. You build like that. So I would just say, as long as you don't put the things off, I think it's okay. Whenever missionaries lay out sort of a C1 to C5, C5 is very clandestine, very inside. You know, Jesus is practically hidden until you get almost all the way into. In other words, even if you join, you don't know that they believe in Jesus. You have to become an elder before they figure out you believe in Jesus. So you go all the way in. C5, C1 is you just clobber, neon lights. If you're a Muslim, you're going to hell, please come and to our services or something like that. Okay, so there's C1, there's C5, and I really do think contextualization, that's over and under adapting, honestly. I do think it's somewhere in the middle and that's what I see in Paul, that's what I see in the scripture. So I actually am very wary of that kind of bait and switch myself. So.